Embrace imperfection. Finding joy in being you. What if everything you've been taught about perfection, success, and self-worth is quietly keeping you disconnected from yourself and from others? In a culture that rewards constant performance and punishes vulnerability, the Gifts of Imperfection offers a radical alternative. Live wholeheartedly by embracing the messy, beautiful truth of who you are. Drawing from years of research on shame, courage, and resilience, Brené Brown invites readers to let go of toxic self-expectations and reclaim a life built on authenticity and connection. This isn't a self-help book filled with quick fixes. It's a compassionate, research-backed guide to living with more meaning, less fear, and deeper joy. Brown's insights are both deeply personal and widely relatable, offering tools that are as practical as they are profound. Whether you're a high-achieving professional worn down by burnout, a parent struggling with self-doubt, or simply someone tired of feeling never enough, this book offers a path forward. You'll learn to recognize your shame triggers, build emotional resilience, and practice the daily habits that lead to real belonging. It's for anyone ready to trade exhaustion for rest, comparison for creativity, and fear for courage. This is not about changing who you are, it's about coming home to it. Point 1. Letting go of perfectionism. Perfectionism often wears the mask of high standards, but at its core, it is not about healthy striving or personal growth. It's about fear of being seen as flawed, fear of making mistakes, and ultimately, fear of not being enough. Unlike the pursuit of excellence, which is internally motivated and rooted in curiosity or a desire to improve, perfectionism is externally focused. It's driven by the belief that if everything is done perfectly, then pain, shame, and criticism can be avoided. But the cost of that belief is high. Consider the professional who never submits a project until it meets an invisible and ever-shifting standard, or the parent who constantly worries about appearing as the perfect caregiver in front of others. These behaviors may look like diligence, but often they're attempts to control how others perceive us. Perfectionism is not self-improvement. It is, in fact, a form of self-abuse wrapped in a socially acceptable narrative. What makes perfectionism especially harmful is how it connects performance to self-worth. When a person equates their value with how well they meet certain expectations, failure becomes more than a learning experience, it becomes a verdict. Even small mistakes trigger disproportionate shame, and success feels fleeting because it simply resets the bar higher. This is why perfectionists often feel exhausted and never satisfied. Their self-worth is contingent, fragile, and dependent on outcomes. Real-life examples highlight this dynamic clearly. A student who hides their work from peers, fearing it's never good enough to share. An employee who avoids asking questions during meetings, afraid it might signal incompetence. These aren't just habits, they're protective strategies to avoid vulnerability. But in doing so, they also block connection, creativity, and growth. Letting go of perfectionism doesn't mean lowering standards or settling for mediocrity. It means recognizing the difference between healthy ambition and compulsive self-monitoring. It means acknowledging that mistakes are not proof of unworthiness, but opportunities for learning. And it means allowing others to see us as we are not polished, not filtered, but real. The shift begins with self-awareness, noticing when the drive for perfection is taking over, asking where that pressure is coming from, and what it's costing. From there, the practice is acceptance. Not resignation, but the radical act of showing up as a whole person, flaws, uncertainties, and all. That's where authenticity lives. And according to Brené Brown's research, that's also where joy, belonging, and resilience begin. Letting go of perfectionism is not a one-time decision. It's a daily commitment to live from a place of worthiness rather than prove it. It's learning to say, I am enough, even when things feel unfinished. Especially then. Point 2. Cultivating self-compassion over self-criticism. Self-compassion is often misunderstood as indulgence or letting oneself off the hook. But in truth, it's one of the most powerful tools for emotional resilience. It doesn't ask for excuses. It asks for honesty, tempered with kindness. Where self-criticism berates and isolates, self-compassion connects and heals. Dr. Kristin Neff, a pioneer in self-compassion research, defines it through three essential elements: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. Self-kindness means offering the same understanding to yourself that you would extend to a close friend. Common humanity is the recognition that suffering and imperfection are universal. Everyone fails, everyone struggles. And mindfulness involves acknowledging pain without exaggerating or suppressing it. These three elements work together to interrupt the cycle of shame and self-judgment. Shame often grows in silence. A small mistake, a missed deadline, a forgotten appointment, can snowball internally into a harsh narrative about who we are. I'm unreliable. I always mess things up. Over time, this inner monologue wears down confidence and increases emotional exhaustion. Self-criticism promises improvement but rarely delivers. It may push in the short term, but it depletes in the long run. Self-compassion, on the other hand, strengthens. When someone fails and responds with self-compassion instead of judgment, their nervous system actually calms down. The body feels safe. That safety allows them to reflect, make amends, and move forward more effectively. This isn't theory. It's supported by physiological research on cortisol and heart rate variability. Compassion reduces stress, and that has lasting effects. A helpful practice is to notice the language used internally. Many people speak to themselves in ways they would never use with someone they care about. Reframing that voice, switching from "what's wrong with you" to "that was hard. What do you need right now?" can change the emotional outcome of a situation. Over time, that practice rewires how we relate to failure and struggle. Consider someone navigating a job loss. Self-criticism might say, "You weren't good enough," amplifying fear and shame. Self-compassion might say, "This hurts." But it doesn't define your value. The situation is still painful, but one version leaves a person depleted, the other leaves them grounded and better able to act. Importantly, self-compassion is not a soft skill, it's a strength. It allows for clearer thinking, steadier decision-making, and more sustainable effort. People who practice it are more likely to hold themselves accountable, not less. They can take responsibility without collapsing under self-reproach. Cultivating self-compassion is a daily choice. It's not natural for everyone, especially those raised in environments where worth was measured by performance or perfection. But the shift is possible. It begins with awareness, grows through practice, and results in a sturdier, more generous relationship with oneself. And from that foundation, connection with others becomes far more genuine. Point 3. The power of authenticity. Authenticity is often portrayed as a natural trait. Either you have it or you don't. But in reality, it's a choice made repeatedly, sometimes dozens of times in a single day. It's the decision to be honest rather than polished, to speak up rather than stay quiet for approval, and to honor one's own values even when it feels risky. Authenticity isn't effortless. It's intentional and at times uncomfortable. Being authentic begins with the willingness to be vulnerable. That doesn't mean oversharing or putting every emotion on public display. It means being real about what matters, saying no when a boundary is needed, admitting uncertainty instead of pretending to have all the answers, and allowing others to see both strength and struggle. Vulnerability invites connection because it signals truth. People may admire perfection, but they trust authenticity. One of the most common obstacles to authenticity is the urge to people please. It's deeply ingrained and often reinforced from childhood. Smile, be agreeable, don't upset anyone. But the cost of constantly managing others' perceptions is steep. Over time, it erodes clarity. When someone is always adjusting themselves to meet others' expectations, they lose sight of what they actually want, think, or need. Pleasing others becomes a habit of self-abandonment. Living authentically doesn't require dramatic acts of rebellion. It's usually quieter, turning down an invitation that doesn't align with your priorities, expressing an unpopular but honest opinion in a meeting, or showing up to a conversation without a rehearsed version of yourself. These small choices reinforce integrity. They help build a self that feels coherent rather than fragmented. Boundary setting is central to this process. Without boundaries, authenticity can slip into performance or resentment. Boundaries define what's okay and what's not. They protect time, energy, and emotional space, making it possible to show up honestly. For example, someone might decide to stop responding to work emails on weekends, not as a rejection of responsibility, but as a commitment to presence at home. That boundary supports a life that reflects real values, not imposed expectations. There's also a surprising outcome to living this way. It often draws people closer. Authenticity fosters trust. When someone is consistently true to themselves, others know where they stand. Relationships built on that kind of openness are sturdier. They may not always be smooth, but they're real. The practice of authenticity is ongoing. Some days it comes easily. Other days, the pull to conform or impress is strong. But every choice made in favor of truth, even a small one, builds a stronger foundation. Over time, this creates more than just confidence. It cultivates peace, the kind that comes from living in alignment with who you really are. Point 4. Reclaiming resilience through gratitude and joy. Joy isn't something people stumble into by accident. It's something they build space for, even when it feels like the last thing they have time or energy for. In fact, Brené Brown's research found that those who describe themselves as joyful aren't necessarily the ones with the easiest lives. They're the ones who actively practice gratitude, often in the smallest, most ordinary moments. This habit becomes a quiet form of resilience, especially in the face of uncertainty or pain. One story stands out from Brown's interviews. A woman who had lost her child and, years later, spoke about how gratitude didn't erase her grief, but gave her something solid to hold on to. She didn't start practicing gratitude after the tragedy. She had already been doing it, jotting down 3 things each day, no matter how mundane. That ritual didn't prevent heartbreak, but it helped her stay grounded when everything else fell apart. This kind of resilience isn't about silver linings or forced positivity. It's about choosing to notice what is still good and worthy, even when life is hard. That choice creates emotional footing, a way back to stability when the ground shifts. And it's a practice, not a feeling. People often wait to feel grateful before expressing it, but gratitude works in reverse. The expression brings the feeling. Still, it isn't easy. A major barrier is what Brown calls foreboding joy, the uneasy sensation that something will go wrong just when things are going right. It's the reflex to brace for disappointment, to preemptively dial down happiness so the fall won't hurt as much. It might look like a parent watching their child sleep and being overwhelmed with love, only to immediately think of losing them. This emotional guarding is fueled by a scarcity mindset, the belief that joy is rare, fragile, and risky. But joy isn't a finite resource. It's renewable, and gratitude is the way people access it more reliably. Developing gratitude rituals, writing down 3 good things each day, sharing them over dinner, keeping a visual gratitude board doesn't take much time, but it trains the mind to seek joy rather than brace against it. Over time, this rewires the emotional response to uncertainty. Instead of automatically scanning for threat, people begin to recognize moments of beauty, connection, or even peace in the chaos. What stands out across the stories Brown gathered is that joyful people aren't chasing extraordinary experiences. They're present for the ordinary ones. A warm cup of coffee, a kind word, a breeze through an open window. They don't wait for perfect circumstances, they notice what's already here. And that noticing builds a kind of strength that can't be faked or forced. It's earned moment by moment through the steady practice of gratitude. Point 5. Trusting intuition and embracing faith. Intuition often gets dismissed as something mystical or unreliable, a gut feeling without substance. But Brené Brown's research reframes intuition as a form of fast, unconscious intelligence. It's not about guessing. It's about recognizing patterns too subtle or complex for conscious thought to parse. Intuition draws on stored experience, emotional memory, and subconscious signals. It's quiet, often easily overridden by louder internal voices like fear or logic, but that doesn't make it less valid. Think of intuition like a compass beneath the noise. It's not designed to provide certainty, but direction. The challenge is that certainty is what most people crave, especially when they're navigating difficult choices. Faith, then, becomes essential, not in a strictly religious sense, but as the willingness to move forward without guarantees. It's the belief that even without perfect information, it's still possible to make meaningful, grounded decisions. This kind of trust requires a relationship with stillness. In a world full of data and distraction, the ability to pause and listen inwardly is becoming rare. Yet, without that pause, intuition can be drowned out. Stillness doesn't have to mean meditation or silence, though it can. It can also be a walk without a podcast, a few deep breaths before speaking, or journaling not to record events, but to explore questions without rushing to answer them. Brown tells the story of a woman who was offered a major job promotion. On paper, it was everything she'd worked for. Her friends congratulated her, her mentors encouraged her, and her family celebrated. But something inside felt unsettled. She couldn't name why. There were no obvious red flags. Still, she declined the offer. Months later, the company's culture shifted dramatically, and the role she would have taken became unstable and eventually dissolved. She didn't predict the future. She simply trusted the subtle discomfort that logic couldn't explain. That trust came from experience, yes, but also from the ability to hear herself clearly enough to respond. Faith works the same way. It asks people to move with purpose, even when the path ahead is unclear. It's not passive, and it's not blind. It's rooted in courage, the courage to acknowledge uncertainty and keep going anyway. Brown describes this as letting go of the need for certainty and control. Not because those things don't matter, but because chasing them at all costs often comes at the expense of peace and clarity. Both intuition and faith invite a softer kind of knowing, less about evidence, more about alignment. Together, they form a quiet counterweight to anxiety and perfectionism. They remind us that knowing everything isn't the goal. Living in integrity is. And sometimes, that means trusting what doesn't come with proof, only resonance. Point 6. The importance of creativity in healing. Creativity isn't reserved for artists or musicians. It's a birthright and one of the most essential components of emotional wellness. Brené Brown's work makes this point clear. Creativity is not a hobby or an extracurricular activity. It's a fundamental expression of our humanity. When people silence that part of themselves, whether out of fear, shame, or habit, they don't just lose a skill. They lose access to an important tool for healing and self-understanding. In Brown's research, one of the most heartbreaking responses she encountered was from people who said, "I'm not creative." Often, these were adults who had once loved to draw or sing or write, but were told, sometimes directly, sometimes subtly, that they weren't good enough. That message doesn't just stifle creativity. It seeds disconnection. Over time, those individuals often struggle to feel seen or expressed, even in areas unrelated to art. Suppressing creativity leads to emotional numbness because creativity is how many people process emotion, make sense of experiences, and connect with others. This isn't just theoretical. A man shared with Brown how, after a painful divorce, he returned to woodworking. It was something he hadn't touched since his 20s, something that once made him feel centered. As he began working with his hands again, shaping, sanding, building, he found he was also processing grief. He didn't talk about it in words, but the act of creating gave form to what he had no language for. That's the healing power of creativity. It moves what's inside into the light, where it can be seen and integrated. The biggest obstacle to reclaiming creativity is comparison. Social media and modern culture fuel the idea that creativity is only valid if it leads to a product, a following, or admiration. But real creativity is about process, not product. It's the act of engaging with something from a place of curiosity or emotion, without the pressure to make it perfect or profitable. Letting go of comparison opens space for joy, experimentation, and self-expression. Brown suggests simple ways to re-engage this part of ourselves: doodling while on a phone call, writing a letter by hand, taking photographs during a walk, learning a few chords on an instrument. These aren't frivolous, they're restorative. They help people reconnect with their inner lives in a culture that constantly pulls them outward. Creativity won't solve every problem, but it builds emotional muscle. It reminds people they have agency, imagination, and voice. In healing, that matters deeply. Because sometimes, The work isn't to analyze or fix, it's to create, to externalize, and to let something new emerge from what was once hidden. Point 7. Building meaningful connections through empathy. Empathy is the glue of human connection. It's what allows people to say, "me too," and really mean it, not as a quick comfort, but as an honest acknowledgement of shared humanity. Brené Brown makes a key distinction between empathy and sympathy. Where empathy sits beside someone in their experience, sympathy stands above and comments from a distance. One connects. The other often isolates. Consider this everyday moment. A friend shares they're overwhelmed at work and feel like they're failing as a parent. A sympathetic response might be, "At least you have a job." A lot of people would love to be in your shoes. While well-intentioned, that kind of reply skips over the emotion and tries to fix or reframe it. An empathetic response sounds more like, "That sounds exhausting." I've felt that way, too, like I'm stretched too thin to do anything well. That second response doesn't solve anything, but it creates space for the other person to feel seen rather than corrected. Empathy requires vulnerability because it asks a person to access their own pain or fear in order to connect with someone else's. That's not always comfortable. It's much easier to offer advice or find the silver lining. But those shortcuts often shut down real connection. Vulnerability, though risky, is what makes empathy possible. Without it, conversations stay on the surface. At the same time, empathy isn't about absorbing another person's emotions or becoming a doormat. This is where boundaries come in. Boundaries allow someone to stay grounded in their own experience while still being present for others. Brown puts it simply, empathy minus boundaries is not empathy. For example, if a coworker constantly vents to you but never asks how you're doing, empathy doesn't mean endlessly listening. It might mean saying, "I care about what you're going through, but I don't have the capacity to talk about this right now." That's not rejection. It's honest connection rooted in self-respect. In relationships, empathy and boundaries work best when they move together. Without empathy, boundaries can feel cold. Without boundaries, empathy becomes unsustainable. Together, they create relationships where people feel safe to be fully themselves and to be fully received. Real belonging starts with that kind of connection. Not with fitting in or pleasing others, but with knowing you can bring your full self, messy, complex, imperfect, and still be met with understanding. Empathy doesn't mean having all the right words. Often, it's just a quiet presence, a nod, a hand on a shoulder. It's one person saying, in some way, "You're not alone." I've been there. And that is more powerful than most solutions.